So I recently watched as a reincarnated aristocrat, I'll use my appraisal skill to rise in the world. And I had a major issue with the series, that being the isekai element. Now I just want to make it clear that I really enjoyed the anime, but I couldn't get past this anime being an isekai. So I want to talk about it here. Additionally, this isn't just a hate on isekai, I actually really like a lot of isekais. But I dislike how a lot of shows now appear to be an isekai just for the sake of it. First, though, what is Aristocrat even about? It's about a salaryman who dies and is reincarnated into a noble family. But this kid has a pretty special skill of appraisal. Ours can see people's stats quantified into current stat and maximum potential, and he uses this skill to assert strengths and weaknesses and to find skilled retainers. The story follows Ars and his followers as he uses his appraisal skill to rise in the world, protecting his domain and his friends. It's a simple fantasy world with strategy and empire building elements, but I really enjoyed it as the characters and world were just charming. I also want to mention the soundtrack for the anime. I thought it was genuinely incredible and made scenes so much more impactful. Honestly, one of the best OSTs I've heard in a long time. With that, I will now discuss the isekai element. This anime does not need to be an isekai, and I will explain why through 5 sections. World explanation, knowledge, character development, item transfer, and motive. So let's start with world explanation. A lot of fantasy anime will use the isekai genre to conveniently explain key aspects of the new world, like class, magic, creatures, politics, and so on. I don't mind this when a character is transferred into another world, like with ReZero, Shield Hero, how a realistic hero rebuilt the kingdom, because it would feel out of place for an adult to monologue about the world they've lived in for years for no reason. However, I dislike the use of this reasoning for reincarnation anime, where the protagonist starts life again from a baby to adulthood, because it's natural for a baby to slowly learn about the world as they grow, and so there's no need for the isekai element, and it could instead just be a fantasy. Although, Aristocrat doesn't really just lore dump, which is good, but it supports the idea that it could just be a fantasy anime instead, as Oz slowly learns about the world as he ages. The next section is on knowledge. Does the protagonist use knowledge from our world to improve or change this new world? The main isekai I can think of which utilizes this aspect of an isekai the most is my personal favorite, Ascendance of a Bookworm, with mine using her knowledge to produce books, create an entire new industry for the economy through printing, sharing recipes and creating life improvements like the water pump and shampoo. This type of isekai is interesting because it allows us to see how different worlds, which, let's be honest, are often set in a romanticized medieval world, respond to modern knowledge. This angle also often makes characters stand out for their knowledge, as in Bookworm, Mine's family notices that Mine acts differently, as does Lutz, with the latter even resulting in confrontation. Aristocrat mildly makes use of this angle, with ours having some minor insights into things like traps, which a young noble probably wouldn't know about, but these are often minor. The most prominent thing of note is Ars's high intelligence level for a 3-year-old, with him speaking fluently and reading books on politics and history, which would have been far beyond what he should be capable of at 3 years old. Although this could justify making the show an isekai, I believe it could have just been a fantasy with Ars simply being a prodigy. There are already precedents for this in the show, with Mireille, Thomas, and Russell, so why not just make Ars one too? It would just be much simpler to do. Character development is the next section, and the main example I have for this is Mushoku Tensei, with Rudius struggling in the early parts of the show, with feelings of isolation, inadequacy, and self-doubt as a result of his experiences in his previous life. A part of what makes that anime so great is watching Rudius develop from a perverse, spiteful person into a mature, loyal one. This aspect is largely irrelevant in Aristocrat, particularly considering that the past life is so insignificant. We don't get a single voice line from his previous life, and we barely even see his face. In fact, I think he only actually shows up in 2 scenes, one at the very start and again in episode 3. Ours appears to barely even reflect on his past life to grow and develop, and instead practically lives life as if it were a blank slate. Yet more reasons why it could be just a fantasy anime instead of an isekai. Item transfer is a small one, where the protagonist brings an item from our world to the new world. Think things like ReZero with his phone, or In Another World with my smartphone, again with a smartphone. These isekai bring items to another world to give them an advantage or to serve as a plot point. But this obviously isn't the case with Aristocrat, as he brings nothing. So let's move along. The final point I want to discuss is motive. How does being reborn affect a protagonist's motive? In Bookworm, for example, it's for Mine to have access to books like she did as Urano. In Mushoku Tensei, it's for Rudius to live a fulfilling life and not repeat his past mistakes. So is Ars's motive influenced by his past life? To be fair, it is. In episode 3, we learn that Ars wants to create a world where children can live happily and freely, because they represented hope from in his previous life. That's nice, but it also changes by the second season to be more about protecting his domain and making a world of peace where everyone can live comfortable lives. I would have said that the motive was enough to make Aristocrat an isekai, however small of an impact it may be. But in literally the final episode of season 2, during the scene where Ars is having tea with Lumiere, following their promotions, Lumiere tells us that his motive was to create a better place in Kanea, trying to help as many people as he could, only he wasn't able to help everyone. This one scene completely changed my stance on the motive angle supporting an isekai, because Ars' motive is practically the same as Lumiere's. And Lumiere was able to get that motive without being reincarnated, so Ars could also have just come to feel that way if it was just a fantasy anime. It may feel like I'm trying to be nitpicky, but I look at it as Occam's razor, where the simplest solution is the correct one, and the anime gives plenty of in-world examples which could just be applied to Ars, rather than convoluting the story by making it an isekai. It also doesn't help that the show barely ever mentions Ars being reincarnated, with it being mentioned in the recaps, for his motive in episode 3, and a confrontation between Koran and Ars, which results in nothing anyway and was therefore irrelevant. I mean, it's just Koran's retainers being suspicious and sharing their thoughts with him. Having gone over all of my points, I really don't think the series had to be an isekai, but I believe it reflects a larger issue with the anime industry, that being that isekais sell. And I mean, I'm guilty of being a part of it too. If I see a comically long isekai title, I am more curious to click on it and see what it's about, than if it were perhaps just a regular fantasy. But I wish it wouldn't be like that, forcing in isekai elements to hopefully boost popularity, especially when the isekai element is barely even relevant. But those are my thoughts on isekai, and why, as a reincarnated aristocrat, shouldn't be one. But as I said at the beginning, I still really enjoyed the anime. I just had this one issue. Also, I haven't read the light novels or the manga, so I don't know if the isekai element is expanded on there. But I hope you enjoyed and let me know if you have any thoughts down below. And do you think the show should be an isekai? Anyway, bye!